Hello and welcome to Everyday Oral Surgery. This is your host, Dr. Grant Stucki. I am an oral and maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Denver, Colorado. The goal of this podcast is to connect, learn, and inspire. In this podcast, you'll be hearing from OMS surgeons all over the globe discussing ways to improve the practice of oral and maxillofacial surgery. Most information shared in this podcast will be based on personal experience and opinions, so please supplement what you learn here with approved research studies. Without further ado, please enjoy today's episode. All right, welcome to another episode. Today I'm with Dr. Roger Levin. He is the founder and CEO of Levin Group. Roger, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast.
Grant, I am so delighted to be here. This is going to be really fun today because we're going to talk about the exciting topic of numbers.
Yes.
But I'm going to try to make it interesting and insightful, because if you don't know your numbers, you have no idea how you're really doing. And my kickoff is to say to all the surgeons listening, you're probably doing pretty well. We estimate that only 2% of surgeons are struggling in some way, shape, or form. So if you want to say to yourself, well, I don't need to know my numbers because I'm doing well, I get that. I really do. I wouldn't even challenge it, other than you could be doing a lot better. You know, there's good, there's great, and there's superior. And my goal is to help anyone that you and I touch go as high as they can in terms of practice success. And if you don't know your numbers, you're now a victim, in this case, a good victim of a good economy, a good supply and demand of patients. But as things change and competition grows, you want to be sharp. You want to know where the opportunities are. You want to see any trends early and take the opportunity to take any corrective action or jump on an opportunity. So that's the really exciting part of numbers to me. At Levin Group, we say all the time, to our consultants, you've got to know the numbers. The client has to know the numbers.
Oh, that's great. So what are the critical numbers that we need to know to have a thriving practice?
Okay, so before I jump right to that, and I'll go there in a second, let me mention everybody, it doesn't take a lot of time. To look at 10 or 15 numbers can take, 10 or 15 minutes or less, and the more you look at them, the more they just start to tell you a story. But what I wanted to mention, I thought, like, how should I open this today to make it meaningful to your listeners? And I always want to do the best job I can, because your podcast, I hear from everybody, is so respected, that I want to make sure I'm at the top of my game. So I went back to Peter Drucker. Now, many people will know who Peter Drucker is on this podcast. Many will not, probably depending on your age. Peter Drucker is the greatest management mind that ever lived. He is the founder of management. Jim Collins, who is famous for his book, Good to Great, that so many people know, and a great author and a great researcher, has said, was a friend of Peter Drucker's, and said he's the most brilliant management mind that ever lived. And Drucker had a very interesting concept, and I want to just kick off with this for you. I hope it's okay if I digress just slightly. And it's about leadership. Managing people has to be one of the hardest things we ever do. And by the way, it's never been really proven that we can manage people effectively. But what has been proven is we can manage ourselves. And if you're a leader, your ability to improve the people around you is somewhat limited. But what's not limited is how you improve yourself. And the more you improve yourself, the more you'll pull those other people right along with you. So that's why the numbers are so important. If you know how you're doing, then you can really talk to your team and manage them and give them explanations and rationale for the discussions that you're having. So if you want to be a great leader, you need to know your numbers. If you want to have a great practice, you need to know your numbers. So here we go. I've broken these up into categories. I've never heard anyone quite do this before. They just shoot lots of numbers at you. And most numbers by themselves don't mean a lot unless you have something to compare it to. So the first category of numbers I'm going to talk about is the category of production. Now, we know that production is the single most important management number in the entire practice. If you said to me, Grant, Roger, give me one number, that's all I'm going to let you talk about, pick one, I would have to pick production, because if production is going up every year, not only will you be successful and maintain success, but you will also be in a position where gradually you will have a great practice because it just compounds over time. So the first number is what we call gross production. And I encourage everyone listening to set a goal every year for gross production, whether it's 5% more this year, 10%, 15, and it depends how hard you want to go at it. 5% is a good number, but most practices can easily grow by 25 to 30% in a couple of years, not necessarily in 1 year. But if you don't even have a goal, you don't really know your production until the end of the year. So set a goal and every week take a look at how are you tracking on your annual production goal. Now in January, it doesn't tell you very much. As we get farther into the year, typically around June, it's starting to tell you a lot because you're running out of time to fix it if you're not on target for the goal. And of course, surgeons, a lot of their production comes in May, June, July, August, second half of November and December. So it's not, you can't just divide by 52 and say I'm on track or I'm not, but you have a pretty good sense of where you stand. Does that make sense, Grant, so far?
Yep, that does. That's really helpful.
Okay. So once you set a production goal, the next thing you have to look at is production per doctor. We have a lot of clients now that have, our last 3 surgical practices, I think, had 5, 6, and 7 doctors, the groups. And you can look at the total practice production, but we always want to know what's the production per provider. And it's not unusual to have one provider who's heads and tails over the other. Sometimes that's the senior doctor, and sometimes that's the newest doctor. It just depends on how they've gone about it. So net production per doctor, critically important, because if you have a doctor, and by the way, I want everybody to know, I criticize nobody, but if you have a doctor who's much, much lower than everyone else, they're going to have to get really motivated to pull themselves up. Otherwise, the other doctors are just going to have to continue to increase production to compensate. Then the third number is production this year versus last year. So we look at monthly on that. How was January 2025 production against January 2024? How was March 25 against March 24? And you look at 2 numbers there. And I want to make sure I make this clear. You look at the same month. How did we do in March versus March a year ago? But then you look at what's called year to date. Okay, we've had January, February, March of this year. We get a production number, and then we compare it to January, February, March of the previous year. And you certainly want it going up. You always want this year to be ahead of last year. And for people listening, it's not just about greed or wanting to make more money. If somebody said, well, and we've heard this, we like consulting help. We want less stress, less fatigue. We want to run better. We don't care if we make more money. That's fine. But if you're not working toward improving production, you're also not working toward improving your day-to-day practice experience and your team. So that's the third production number. So quick review, we look at total production for the year called gross production. We set a goal. Then we look at production per doctor, so we have a sense of who's doing what. And then we look at production this year versus last year by month, and then the total year to date. So again, June 30th, we would look at how's everybody done the first 6 months of 2025 against the first 6 months of 2024. So I'll go back over some things to try to bring clarity to these numbers as we go. Now, the next ones get a little deeper, but they're really important. We look at that gross production, but now we also need to look at production per hour. That's an incredibly powerful statistic. It tells you how the doctors are doing. All hours will not be equal, but what's the average production per hour? And then, and some of the folks already know where I'm going, the hours add up to the year. So if we keep having hours that are lower on average than add up to our goal at the end of the year, we'll miss our goal at the end of the year. So this is a real opportunity to pick up how we're doing. And by the way, most practices, I've mentioned this, I may have mentioned it before in one of our podcasts, can save 10 minutes per hour per doctor easily. We do this in our management consulting all the time. And that gives you an extra 2 full months per year of doctor production time without working any harder. And if that doesn't impress people, it gives you 6 extra years of doctor production time in a 36-year career. It's amazing. It's incredible. Think about 6 more years of take home income, but you don't work 1 more minute. So that's why we look at production per hour. There are a number of techniques to improve production per hour that adds up into improving production per year. So let me stop there and see if you have any questions, Grant.
Okay, so just trying to grasp the value of production per hour. You're looking at this to say, well, how efficient are we on this hour? And when you say that maybe you could save 10 minutes, are you meaning there's more efficient use of your time in those 10 minutes, or you could be seeing more patients, or what are you referring to?
Yeah, it is about speed, but I don't want to scare anybody. We never believe in rushing people. It's about efficiency. If you bring efficiencies like staff training, sometimes having a rover assistant, sometimes having a faster assistant, technology, anything that speeds up the process, and the opportunities are enormous. We work with this every day. You can easily save 10 minutes an hour. By the way, the biggest violation of time management is the schedule itself. Most surgeons have schedules that are out of date. But by the way, when I started in dentistry back in 1982, the average third molar appointment was always scheduled for an hour of doctor time, not an hour of patient time. Certainly it was patient time, but it was an hour of doctor time to take out 4 third molars. Now, there are many surgeons, that are in there for 20 minutes and they're done, sometimes faster and occasionally slower. So
Yeah.
my point is that there's still this 10-minute window that we identified years back, and we worked very hard to create the efficiencies, because I can't imagine a better contribution, and we really care, of giving somebody 2 extra months a year in their career. And the earlier they get on this, the more benefit they're going to get throughout their career from it. So that's how that works.
What do you say to the doctors or the teams who say, well, we need 10 minutes at least of like some type of buffer in case we're running behind, and then we're making everyone else wait, and it's just too hard to predict surgery, all this stuff. How do you talk about that?
Well, what I would simply say is, and again, I have to remember I've done this for 41 years. I'm surrounded by brilliant consultants who are working with practices. This isn't theory. We get to really see, as I always say, I live in the biggest practice management lab in dentistry. And the answer is you're not using your team properly. Doctors don't need a buffer. We know what the average amount of time is to do a case. And occasionally you'll run a little longer, and occasionally you'll run a little faster. But the team is in a position to do so much more than what they're doing today, allowing doctors to do the only thing they should be doing, which is the doctors should only be doing what only doctors can do. Another way I say it, if you're not required to do it by state board regulation, your team should be doing it for you. Now, we hear all the wonderful excuses, and they are wonderful excuses. Well, I'm faster than my staff. I'm better than my staff. The patient wants me. Here's the truth. The truth is you can train your staff to do any and all of that beautifully. You don't need a buffer. You need a better schedule, is the way it works. It's like a marathon runner saying, well, at mile 20, I need a little bit of a buffer. Well, you just lost the race.
Yeah,
So,
got it.
athletes will time. I've studied elite athletes, believe it or not. I've studied them through sports psychologists. When I was looking at, well, what do they do to be elite? And then I tried to apply some of those principles to surgeons as well. And it's not that I want people pressured or rushed. We don't do any of that because we use procedural time studies to know how much time somebody really needs. But interestingly, most surgeons are pretty similar. General dentists doing a crown, the time they need ranges all over the place. I've seen it go from 15 minutes to 2 hours. Surgeons are pretty similar, all in all. And if you need a buffer or you feel like you're always behind, you're not delegating the way you should be. And that's really important. Maybe a different podcast, but delegation is a critical element of success.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, the better you improve yourself, the better you know the numbers, the better leader you'll be to your team there.
Nice.
So, yeah. So the next category is collections. Now, I want to explain this clearly so nobody thinks I'm contradicting myself. Production is the most important. Those numbers are the most important numbers in the practice. If you get production right, you're always going to be fine, and you can go gradually from good to great. But you can't spend production because there's this thing called collections. And we do see a lot of surgical practices that collect extremely well and others that do not. Our target for production. So let me go back a minute. If someone called me tomorrow and said, well, Roger, I heard the podcast. Just give me a ballpark on production. How much more should I do this year? My answer would be 15% as a ballpark. Now, I don't know this practice, but I'm not being irresponsible. I know that most practices, if you get the right systems in place, could grow about 15% in a first year with a lot of efficiencies put in place. The next question is collections. What should the collection percentage be? And we use 98%. Now, let me make sure everybody understands me by me being clear, because I always say if somebody doesn't understand me, I wasn't clear. This is adjusted collections. You can't collect money that the insurance company won't allow you to collect. So when you say my fee is X and the insurance company says, well, you're only allowed to charge Y, that's the real number. Y is the real number. So we want to collect 98% of what is legitimately and legally owed to the practice. And by the way, a lot of your problems will come with referring doctors from trying to collect overdue accounts. People don't like it. They go back and they say bad things about you. Collecting money is also good customer service because then nobody's unhappy that they have to pay you later. So we look at collections this year versus last year, year to date. Again, on June 30th, how much have we collected in 2025? And how much did we collect by June 30th, 24? And we compare. We would like collections to grow at the same percentage as production. If you get your production up 15%, then we should be collecting 15% more money as well. Those track together very nicely. So we want to collect 98%. And then the other interesting thing, and again, I don't ever want anybody singled out, but collections per provider is really important because we see clients where 4 doctors will have excellent collections and 1 will have terrible. And it's because of the way he's explaining things and handling things. And sometimes they have different people collecting money for them. So you want to get one office policy on collections and everybody follows the same policy. Policies are a great thing in terms of how we operate the practice day to day. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that sure does. Those are good.
Yeah.
I guess secondary numbers to know when after looking at production.
Yeah. All right. The next one might not seem important. We'll get to things like implants, but it's really important. In fact, it's surprisingly important, is write-offs. Now, the first set of write-offs are people that you give courtesies to. Do you give courtesies to every physician, every physician's family, because they refer next to nothing to oral surgeons? Do you give courtesies to referring doctors? Well, we have a formula for that. And the answer is your A doctors and B doctors and their families should certainly not be charged. Your A doctor and B doctor staff should get discounts, but they are write-offs. And then we have the insurance write-offs. What is your usual and customary fee and what are insurance plans paying you? And we scrutinize that with new clients to determine, are there certain plans they're better off not being in? And we're very cautious. We're not cavalier about it. I don't want people to call me after this podcast and say, get me out of these insurance plans. I want to drop everything, because we get those calls too. People get mad. and they call us and go, I want consulting. I'm dropping all my insurance. And our first question is, well, what percentage of your revenue comes from insurance? 55%. Well, you might not want to drop all your insurance when over half your revenue is coming from insurance. And we find you lose about half the patients. Ask any surgeon that's dropped a plan. They've lost a few referring doctors who no longer refer those insurance patients to them because the patients don't want to go. And it's funny, patients will go to a fee-for-service dentist, but demand an insurance participating specialist. We see that too. So you want to look at your percentage insurance write-offs. How much discount are you giving each plan? And you want to look at your courtesy write-offs. And by the way, that number shocks our clients. When we tell them after we analyze the practice, the amount of courtesy write-offs they're giving, they had no idea. They absolutely had no idea that they were giving the amount that they're giving. So it's a good number to look at. Nobody knows it because it's one here, one there. All these one-offs are hard to track if you don't bring it up in the software. So those are two really sneaky ones, so to speak, that we should look at.
I mean,
Now,
real quick,
yeah,
do you do anything about the courtesy write-offs if someone has this huge number? I mean, what coaching is
yeah.
there?
Well, everybody on this one has to have their own philosophy. I can only share mine, which is physicians. I'm not a believer in professional courtesy to physicians that don't refer to you and have no ability to refer to you. Senior discounts. Surgeons have lots of seniors. This is not an AARP situation. I wouldn't do senior discounts. When you're giving courtesies to referring doctors and their families and staff, that's a marketing activity. Sometimes a surgeon will say to me, well, why should I give this away? Because whatever you're not collecting is marketing dollars. What could be better than you treated their family? But when you get doctors that send you their third and fourth child that don't even refer to you, then we stop giving courtesies, because as long as you've tried through referral marketing to bring them on board, because what they're saying is, well, Grant, you're the best surgeon in town. And for my family, I want you, but for my patients, I'm going to send to this other relationship that I have. So at some point you say, okay, well, I've treated one child, tried to build a relationship with you. I treated a second child, or your spouse tried to build a relationship with you. It went nowhere. And then just to be nice, I often advise 80%, but not zero in those situations. On the other hand, don't get too restrictive. We've had surgeons that, well, how much should I charge the front desk person of this referral source? Well, is this an A? Yeah, it's my best referral source. You charge them nothing. And you tell them, we're doing this for you because your office refers many, many patients to us. And then you let the general dentist know that, so they can remind the staff member they just got a benefit by working in their practice. But nothing's better than a front desk person being asked about a surgeon and saying, oh, I went to them, they're great. That's the best advertising you can possibly get. So, yeah, but these courtesies, they sneak up on you over time. We've seen practices that have low hundreds of thousands, six figures in courtesies, and had no idea that they were even doing it. It was just a legacy for them.
Oh.
Yeah. So the next one will be interesting to everybody. It's implants. And implants are a big part of a surgeon's production. We like the number of implants going up every year, so we have to measure it. And we measure two things with implants: how many units were placed and what was the production. Now, with implants, we also include what I call ancillary services. Anything you do related to the implant case, bone grafting, augmentation, any kind of surgery, that counts as implant production. So we estimate that there's at least a 20% add-on to the implant. It's the pure implant production from ancillary services. So how many implants have you done, and how many and what is your implant production? If you're not happy with it, there are endless discussions we can have on how to build the number of implants in your practice, but the biggest is getting together with referring doctors and telling them how you'll support them. They are still afraid of the bigger cases. They don't know what to do. Implants are, I think, the only case in dentistry that requires two doctors. In other words, the surgeon places the implants, the dentist then restores the implants. And cases can be wildly different and variable. And a lot of dentists don't refer. I know it sounds terrible, but it's true. They don't refer implants because they don't want to restore certain cases. They're not comfortable doing it, nor do they want that patient sent to a prosthodontist out of fear of losing the patient. So you have to help them understand there's a safety net. I'll get the rep in there, or we know someone who will help you, and get them comfortable, and then compare year over year. You want your number of implants placed going up every year. And by the way, I'll mention this because this podcast is timely. I'm not sure, but we may be entering a slightly more difficult economic era in the United States for a while. When the economy slows down, the number of implants placed slows down as well. It's that term, economically elastic. The analogy I use is jewelry. You buy jewelry, the economy slows down, you stop buying jewelry. And that's the elastic part. Same thing with implants. So I encourage everyone listening, ramp up your implant marketing, your relationships with referring doctors, and let them know how you're going to support them with the cases that they refer. Very important to do. So those are two really good numbers to look at. And then case acceptance. You know, most surgeons have fairly good case acceptance on implants, but Grant, here's something you and I have never talked about, and this is mind-blowing. So, so often we think we've just done the job. And I've got a saying for myself, at least, I'm not as good as I think I am. And I really believe that, because when you think you're as good as you think you are, you stop trying to get better, number one. But number two, I'm really not as good as I think I am. And what I mean by that is these patients come in and accept treatment, but 35% of patients referred by general practices for implant consults never make an appointment. So 35 out of every 100 patients where it's recommended you have an implant consult never get the consult. Simple change, which I'm going to share with everybody, even though this is a numbers discussion. If you can get the referring practice to call your office while the patient is standing in their office to make the appointment, 95% will show up. So we go from 65% to 95%. That is a huge win. Now, you've got to have the referral marketing and you got to have the relationships to make this work. But if you do, it's incredible, the difference. Now, here's the problem. When the 65% come, well, they're already pretty motivated. They bothered to make the consult appointment and come in. When 95% come, you don't have people who are quite as intensive, excited, enthusiastic. Many of them are just checking it out. That's where your case acceptance has to get better. It's not a slam dunk. It's not an automatic. So you want to measure case acceptance, and you want to have, on implants, you'd like to have a 90% acceptance rate. Third molars are easier because that's more of an expectation. It's more of a rite of passage. It's covered often by insurance. But let's measure case acceptance percentages, how many cases presented, how many cases accepted. And you might find out, many of you will, that you could be better. And that's good, because I call that opportunity. That's a positive thing, even though you'd like to have already hit it out of the park, as they say. How's that strike you, Grant?
Good. I really like this point of focusing on implants and case acceptance. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot you could delve into there, and that you do with your clients as far as how to increase case acceptance. What does the script look like? How do you talk about implants? One thing I, would bring up is I have lots of friends who are oral maxillary surgeons who repeatedly say, if I could just do wisdom teeth for the rest of my life, I'd be a happy man. Implants are a pain in my rear, and there's all these problems, and you have to see them again and again, and and so um, I think a lot of us have that feeling that implants are more of a thorn in our side than they are like a boost or an extra muscle we can use to strengthen our practice. What is your thoughts on that one?
I have two diametrically opposing thoughts on that. First of all, I acknowledge what you're saying is correct. There are plenty. Everybody in life likes easy. My favorite expression in referral marketing, I have said it 1,000 times in seminars. Whoever makes it easiest wins. Okay, the surgical practice that makes it easy, that adopts the attitude of you contact us, we will take over, we will take full responsibility, is going to win. Having said that, everybody wants easy. So for surgeons, third molars are easy. They're lucrative. It's a great life. There are plenty of surgeons who go to the hospital. There are plenty who don't, but you don't have to leave your office. You get out on time. It's mainly predictable. It's great. Now, having said that, why are implants also great, despite the fact that they can be headaches? Because not everybody can do them. If implants were simple at this point, GPs, and there are some GPs doing a lot, not too many. Most GPs might do a little bit and refer the rest. And the truth is, the majority refer almost everything. Most GPs aren't placing implants and don't want to. Well, the reason they don't want to is because of all that follow-up and complications. But because of that, surgeons get to retain implant surgery, and it's not being taken over by the general dentist. So on one hand, I completely agree with you. It'd be easier not to do it. On the other, it's partly because of its complexity that it's such a lucrative and productive service from the surgical practice. So if somebody can do it on all third molars, great. The other thing that would scare me is all your eggs in one basket. I like multiple services so that if one thing slows down, the other's still good, and vice versa. So far, third molars are covered by insurance, and then we have anesthesia, and we have bundling, and the insurance companies aren't going to make it any easier for us. So I like having also an elective service that's generally not covered as part of the service mix in the practice.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think that, 99% of us, we don't live in this vacuum of having unlimited wisdom teeth cases. So we need to be able to do implants, do them well. And I think when you embrace it and you have that mentality of, this is enjoyable, I can make this work. There's things we can do to make this less painful and streamlined and easier. And you enjoy implants. I don't know how you force yourself to do that. Maybe if you're not enjoying it, but it just becomes such a tremendous practice builder, I feel like.
So I'm gonna do a huge digression here, and I'll do it quickly because I'm asking myself, should this be in a podcast? But I'm gonna tell you how to make it fun, and everybody's gonna laugh at me. But please, everybody, just go try it, because I do a lot in my life, and I use this all the time, and it works, at least for me. It works 100% for me. So there's a science called positive psychology. I know this isn't why we're here today, but just for fun, and some of your listeners will go benefit from this, and that's great. And positive psychology is a field where you don't have issues. Psychology, up till the formation of positive psychology, which was a professor and researcher at University of Pennsylvania. This is a real discipline. You can look it up. There are textbooks on it. Psychology was always about having pathology. You had something mentally that was bothering you or not right, and you'd get psychologists and they would treat you. Positive psychology is for people who don't have any really big issues, but they want to live great lives. And I was reading one of the textbooks years ago. I became very fascinated by it. And one sentence answers the question you brought up. How do you enjoy implants? And it's this sentence: "This will be fun." And right now, I know Grant, you're probably laughing and saying, "Oh, come on, Roger, really?" I use it all the time. If I got when at the end of my workout in the gym, it's abdominal time. I do serious whatever. So they're sore. But I say to myself, I don't feel like doing it today. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, and this will be fun. I can turn most negative situations around. And I've trained myself. When I start feeling negative about something, I say to myself, this, and I have to do it anyway, this will be fun. And it's been an immediate change. It happened right away for me in my attitude. So all I can do, I know we're out on a limb here, but I would
Yeah.
say to our listeners, if you're doing implants, embrace it. If you're going to do something, try to enjoy it. Make it the best you can. This will be fun. Even a referring doctor who drives you out of your mind, instead of cringing every time you have to talk to him, this will be fun. And so, Grant, I want you to at least try it and give you some feedback. It works for me anyway. And they teach this in this. It's a science, that was developed at University of Pennsylvania, and it's a real field now. So I love it, but I like being positive. So
And I think that would be a great thing almost even to say out loud in front of your staff because, your staff, I feel like they mimic
yeah,
so much of what you do. So if you're always griping about implants and, oh, great, another, full mouth with all on four, I hate these, your staff kind of mirrors that and they're depressed about it too. But if you're saying things like this, oh, this is going to be an awesome case. This is going to be so great. We're going to learn stuff. We're going to help this patient. They're getting more jazzed about it.
yep. Well, on another podcast on leadership one day, I will remind everybody, leaders don't get to complain. When you're complaining, you're bringing everybody else down, and you're telling them it's okay if they complain, and now you're downgrading the whole mood. So I love your idea. You tell your staff, we got a tough case here. This will be fun. We got a referring doctor that drives somebody nuts at the front desk. Okay, when this guy calls, we want to make it fun. And they get that. So we want to raise our staff up, not bring them down. That's a great point, Grant. Yeah,
Love it.
really good. Okay, so let me give you one other area. Well, there are a couple of other areas. A number you need to know that most surgeons do know is overhead. What is your overhead percentage? Now, everybody remember, percentage is not a number, it's two numbers. A percentage is a ratio. So overhead is when you say I'm at 50%, that's overhead as a percent of revenue. Okay, great. Here's what you have to watch for. And we've been really focused on this at Levin Group because the times they are changing. If your production goes up, that's great. But if your overhead goes up by a higher percentage than your production, your profit still goes down. Here's the example. If you produce $1 million a year and your overhead is 50%, your net take home is $500,000. But if you grow then to 1.1 million, but your overhead grows to 70%, you're actually going to end up losing money. So the percentage increase in production must always exceed the percentage increase in overhead. And that's why we watch it carefully. What's happened in the last few years? Staff compensation is up about 10%. Some of our supplies are up about 6% because during COVID, the supply chain was a problem. Prices went up. Well, COVID's gone and those prices have not come back down. They stay up. So another reason to raise production every year is I can guarantee you one thing in life: overhead will increase every year, the cost of practicing. So you've got to bring production up in order to keep pace with overhead or outpace overhead. So make sure you know that number, look at it regularly. Great technique is for a doctor to sit down every 4 months, 5 months, or 6 months and take, an hour and look at every line item of expense in the last 30 days or 60 days. Nobody wants to do it. It's not fun, but you say, this will be fun. and you go do it. But look at every line item because that's how you find out where you can cut overhead. We had a practice, it's not a big deal, but they were a new client. They were spending $580 a month on subscriptions they didn't even know they had, that they signed up years ago, and they're just ongoing and bundled and doesn't show up and say subscription on the invoice. And it's not a fortune, but it's $580 a month either way that could be put to better use. That's just one example. Periodically bid out your highest expenses. There are businesses that are required to get 3 bids every year on their top 10 expenses. You might want to get bids on implants, or you might want to at least ask your implant company, if I buy X amount, where are the breakpoints that I get a discount? Your financial advisors, I know that's not the practice, but the more you invest, the lower your percentage of their compensation should be. But if you don't ask, people don't always rush to do that for you. So look at your overhead, look at the line items, see if you can reduce it 1% here, 1% there. Because remember, 1% of $100,000 revenue is $1,000. So if you lower your overhead 1%, that's the same as increasing your profit by $1,000. If you lower it 4% on $100,000, that's $4,000. But if you lower it 4% on $1 million, that's $40,000 of additional income at the end, throughout the year and at the end of the year. So the $1,000 might not excite anybody, but the 40,000 should get everybody's attention. That's 40,000 over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years is significant. Yeah. Okay. Then the last area, and then I have a few one-offs I can mention, but the bit that's huge, of course, is new patients. How many new patient calls do you get? That's critical to know. In addition to where are they coming from, but that's a whole separate referral marketing analysis. How many calls do you get? Now, the next one, nobody measures, and you need to, and it's not in your software. How many make appointments to come in? We had a new client a couple months ago, 20% of the patients that called never made an appointment because the front desk person was not competent, was not necessarily rude, but brusque, didn't really want to talk to them, viewed new patients as an interruption in her day. She'd been there a long time. Unfortunately, sometimes after a long time, you're stale, you're burnt out. We don't want that. We want to lead people to greatness all the time. But anyway, 20% of the callers, when we started measuring, weren't making appointments. And the reason this 2-surgeon practice came to Levin Group for consulting was they were having some cash flow problems. Well, the reason they were having it is a lot of their callers weren't making appointments to come in. So we measure how many new patients call, how many make an appointment. Then we measure how many come in because you get some attrition from no-shows. And I'll come back to no-shows in a minute. Nothing's worse than expecting a consult that doesn't show up. And then, of course, as I said earlier, we measure the case acceptance on our patients to see how we're doing. So how many new patients do we get? How many new patients per referral source do we get? We compare year over year. And then you find out, whoa, my third best referral source has dropped down to 7th or 8th. Something's happened. What's going on? What do I need to do about this? And then always measure new referral sources. That's a really good, simple number, nice to know, and make sure you're reaching out to them and, building a relationship and treating them like a VIP. So my last couple, Grant, are very simple. Measure your no-shows. Surgical practices typically don't have a lot of no-shows, but if the economy slows down, you will see a little more of it. And what they don't think about, this is so important, is a last-minute cancellation, day before, the morning of, for a surgical appointment. It's the same as a no-show. It's open chair time that you can never get back. So we want to measure no-shows. We want to measure last-minute cancellations within 24 hours of the appointment. And then finally, how many patients on average are seen per day. And you might say, well, Roger, why do we need that? If I have a really big implant case in the morning, I might outproduce every day the rest of the week. And that's true, but it's also bad scheduling because surgeons are tough, surgeons are type A, and surgeons will exhaust themselves. And there's no reason to do that. You need a schedule that is productive, that is efficient, but also doesn't tire you out. You should be going home with excellent energy, feeling good, and saying to yourself, I had a great day. I'm coming in tomorrow and it will be fun. so, so Grant, I turn it back to you. Those are the numbers at minimum. By the way, to look at all these numbers, you have your office manager prepare them. You're not sitting there pulling them out of the software. Hand you a spreadsheet with these numbers month, and you build it month after month in columns so you can see how things are doing. And again, don't compare January to June. Compare June to the previous June to see how you're doing. You can review these numbers in 15 minutes to get a sense of how you're doing.
Oh yeah, I absolutely love this. I think it's such an important, critical thing to be monitoring and reviewing, with some frequency in your practice. Such great numbers. Really, really helpful. One example I had was just the other day, we were starting to look at the numbers of like getting into implants and bone grafts. Well, how many patients, do we do an extract bone graft on that actually come back to get the implant, that we prepared the site for with the bone graft, and it was shockingly lower than we thought. And then the next number is how many of the people got an implant actually came back to get the implant checked and then the crown per the GP. And again, you'd think that would all those numbers would all be like 100%, right? You just assume that, but it's crazy. There's people who get implants and just never get follow up, and they have an implant without a crown on it for the rest of their life. I mean, it's small stuff like that, and you forget patients need to be held by the hand sometimes and get all these patients treated.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's when you and without the numbers, you just don't know. Going back to what I said at the beginning, if you say to your staff, "We'll call these people and tell them they need to get back to their GP," they don't understand why. Simon Sinek, the author, has a great statement that people don't act until they know why. And when you look at these numbers, you suddenly find out, whoa, some of this is not happening. By the way, in referral marketing, one of the most important things is to get that patient back to the GP. This is your chance to give them production, which is not
Yeah.
always the case. So you've got to get the patient back to them. You've got to let them know the patient's ready to come back to them. And their offices don't do a good job of contacting patients. They wait for the patient to call. So proactive is really important here. But if you're not looking at these numbers, you're in the dark. You have no idea what's going on. And again, if your production is good, you tend not to care. This looks like work, but you're not running a good business and you're not finding the opportunities or preventing downturns in the future. And that's why when I put these together and I prepared for this podcast, I wanted to make the case that this is so important. It's also easy. It's not hard to do. We spend a lot of time talking about it, but once you understand it, it's easy to do, but it gives you great information. And some of it is surprising. We have new clients that are constantly surprised they'll say, well, I didn't know that. And they didn't know that. The good news is now they do, and they can act on it and strategize accordingly. So in business, it's all about numbers. If we're telling our consultants over and over and over, know your numbers, know the numbers, know the numbers, well, that's good advice to all of our listeners then as well.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you running through some of these critical numbers, not overwhelming at all, but like some key points I think we can all take notice of and have our team members help us to pull these numbers and review them and learn stuff and know where to improve in our practice.
Yep. Well, I hope, as always, my goal is to help your listeners in every way I can and give them an opportunity to make incremental improvement. I think the ending here is the phrase continuous cyclical improvement. I won't go back over where that came from, but if you just keep making small improvements and the work you're doing, Grant, with the podcast really contributes to that in so many ways. And you make those small improvements, well, they add up, and you're going to have a great career. And I get calls from people who had great practices and don't today, and that could have been avoided. They just didn't know it. They didn't understand it. So I'll always go out of my way to help our listeners with hopefully good information, and numbers are where it all happens on the management consulting side of the equation.
For sure. Well, this has been another great podcast in our series of practice management and helping our listeners to, improve and help their practices thrive and grow. So really appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to our next episode.
I am as well. And just remember, it will be fun.
That's right.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Roger. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Everyday Oral Surgery. For more information on these podcasts, please visit everydayoralsurgery.com. I love feedback and would be very grateful if you would reach out to me via my email, grantstucki@gmail.com, and let me know what you thought of this episode. Or you can text me at 720-441-6059. Additionally, if you have any topics you'd like to hear about, or if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email or text me. I found many of my interviewees through people who have been contacting me and have been listening, and I've gotten so many great ideas for more podcasts, and that's what helps keep the podcast rolling. So I really appreciate you making that extra effort and helping me out with feedback and knowing what to do next on the podcast. Thank you so much.